Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. I was hoping to put off this conversation for a little while longer, but the season is done, as it were. So we must have a postmortem with the only man that anyone wants to hear give a postmortem or be part of a postmortem. I'm not going to ask you to deliver a eulogy, although it'd be kind of fun if I asked you on the spot to eulogize the 23-24 New York Knicks of The Athletic and, of course, Katz and Shoot on Patreon. Fred Katz, hello.
I think there are a lot of people who would rather hear from anybody else, but I'll take it.
I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. People like you, Fred.
I don't know why. I don't know why. We'll see. We'll see after the eulogy. Who knows? You get put on the spot.
We'll see after the eulogy.
You get put on the spot for a eulogy, and all of a sudden, who knows? You say the wrong thing, you're done. Everybody hates you.
I gave 2 eulogies in my life. You ever give a eulogy?
I gave one eulogy after the Pistons gave out that Marvin Bagley contract.
You're doing so. Sorry. Actually, I want to tell people behind the scenes what transpired about a minute ago, which is that Andrew Claudio said that he was leaving us to switch computers for about 15 minutes. So Fred, for the entirety of that time, is going to try to grab the steering wheel from me. Not that I have ever a tight grip on it, and steer it directly into oncoming traffic, a ditch. Doesn't really matter. He just wants to derail the program, which is fine.
It's correct. It's the only reason I come on here. The only reason I come on here is because I think it's such a good product that it just needs to be ruined. And you guys are my competition now. So I just come on here, I try to ruin the podcast, and I leave. And for some reason, you keep having me on.
I do, because I enjoy it. Speaking of driving things into oncoming traffic, you caused the first official stir of the Knicks postseason when you I have to say, very innocently, dropped one line into what was a very lengthy article about all manner of different things. It was wonderful. It was your season wrap up, essentially. But because you had one paragraph in there which mentioned a few names of people not on the Knicks, it caused a bit of a stir. We'll get back to that in a bit. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the end of the season and how it went down. I'll just start here because you were there for all of it. You were there for the Indiana series. You were there for the whole Philly series. I mean, you were there for the whole season. Could you describe the vibes after Game 7 to the best of your abilities?
Disappointed. It wasn't. I didn't get the vibes of unbelievable depression.
Okay.
I think I got the vibes of more, okay, this is the start of something. They were very disappointed. They were very upset with how the season ended. I think they realized how injured they were. And I'm not saying they were using that as an excuse, but I think they were using it as a reason. I think they believed that if they were healthy, they would have moved on. And they weren't using it as a way to discount the Pacers. As a matter of fact, they kind of all said the opposite in terms of giving the Pacers credit, talking about how they were a good team who played a good series, all that kind of stuff. But I do think they feel like if they had stayed healthy, they could have won that series. And I do think there was kind of this vibe of this isn't done emanating from the outside. I think Brunson was very disappointed. And he has a very binary definition of success. He needs to be the perfect player. And if he's not, he's dissatisfied. And the team needs to be the perfect team. And if not, then he's dissatisfied. Whereas I don't think that necessarily describes, I think everybody approaches competition in a different way. I don't think that describes Josh Hart. I think if you ask Josh Hart, was this season a failure? I don't think he would say it was a failure. I think he would say they didn't get to where they wanted, but Josh was pretty open and talking about the team as if he was like a GM, talking about how this is a great building point, great building block, and how bright their future is as an organization, as a team, all of that. And I don't necessarily disagree. I just think it's interesting to hear a role player speak with that kind of perspective, because a lot of role players, you just don't They don't know. They live in I don't know. They live in I could get traded. You know, they live in I could be out. I could be out. Like, why the heck should I, as somebody who, when this team is fully healthy, is a bench guy, why should I feel like I'm just here forever? You know, but there is something about this team that kind of makes them feel this togetherness and that they're kind of a part of something greater, you know? And I think that's an element of this too, with a lot of those guys.
I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but like, you look at the core and I don't even know which of the, like, put like Bogdanovic and like Burks aside, and I guess we'll talk about Randle later, but like, well, actually, no, I can just say it now. Like, unless Giannis or someone of that ilk becomes available, I would imagine that Julius Randle is going to be back on this team next year. Would you agree that is the likeliest scenario?
I think the only way they trade Randle is if they feel like they have a legitimate upgrade on Randle.
And there's not many of those out there. And when you consider like positional fit and like everything, so like, but like the rest of these, you know, Brunson, obviously, but even like Hart, DiVincenzo, OG, even though he's a free agent, they clearly, obviously they want him back. And it seems like it just as obvious they want Isaiah Hartenstein back. And like, I'm curious to pick your brain on that as far as like if you think they'll just go to the max that they could pay him. But like this, I can't remember the last time, I mean, certainly a Knicks team, but like there aren't many teams in the NBA where like there's this level of certainty, like unless a team like wins a title or is like maybe like the Thunder this year where it's like, okay, it's young, like the whole thing, you know, usually there's like a piece or two where you're like, all right, well, this guy's probably not going to be back for like whatever reason or not. Even if it's like a Derrick Jones Jr. on Dallas, they can't pay him, something like that. Like usually guys are going to be exited from the equation. That's not the case here, is it?
I'm hesitant to say with any amount of certainty because who knows? You know, we don't know what's going to happen here, and we don't know who's going to become available. And if someone does become available who is very worth it in the long term, that could rejigger things. You know, if there's somebody who's awesome that they want to go after, and all of a sudden Randle does become expendable and somebody else has to go too, and you just have to suck it up to make the move. You know, we've seen lots of crazier stuff than the Knicks trading Dante DiVincenzo would be. You know, the Bucks traded Drew Holiday, who's like one of Giannis's best friends, in order to bring in Damian Lillard because they thought it made them better, you know, and that was a championship core and one of Giannis's best friends. And this is, you know, the best player in the Eastern Conference we're talking about in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and the Bucks still did it because they felt the pressure of like, we got to improve the roster right now in order to extend Giannis. So I'm not ruling anything specifically out, but I do think if the Knicks had their way, they would be able to make a trade for a star that was centered around draft picks and maybe trading only like one guy out of their core. And, you know, maybe it's Bogdanovic and Mitchell Robinson, and the trade includes just a ton of picks. And that's how you get necessary salary. Maybe Deuce McBride is part of it. But I think the purpose is if they want to make a star trade, I think what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to build it around a ton of picks. And then they're going to see what happens from there. But I think they're going to try to do it for a ton of picks. And then you see the Bogdanovic guarantee is going to be really interesting too.
June 26th, right?
June 28th.
28th, excuse me. They can mutually agree to put that off, can they not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They can.
So that, which they did, Hart did that, right? Didn't he put off? Wasn't there a date?
No, Hart had a player option. He picked up the player option, and then there was kind of a wink that he's going to extend. That'll happen. There have been various times where it's happened.
Yeah, no, I know it had. I thought it happened in here the last few years, but I'm imagining that. Yeah, no, that is going to be fascinating because it would be kind of shocking if they didn't because let's go through the logic. We're getting off track already, but it's fine. Let's go through the logic of why they would not pick it up. It would basically be to avoid getting into the first apron with the math of OG and Hartenstein, right? And if they kept both draft picks or whatever.
Yeah. So let's say they keep. I'm gonna have something on this for later this week. Actually, I'm gonna have a story on this. Let's say they keep Hartenstein for his max first offer, $16.1 million starting salary in 2024-25. Let's say they re-sign OG for a starting salary of $35 million.
Sounds good.
Which might be high, might be low. I feel like that's kind of in the middle of some nice round number. Let's say starting salary is $35 million. That means they're going to have 8 players under contract for next year whose salaries add up to $155 million. That alone brings them like $17 million short of the luxury tax.
Mm-hmm.
So you pick up that you hold on to Bogdanovic instead of releasing him for what's the small guarantee? It's like $2 million,
2
right?
point something.
Right. It's around a little over $2 million. So you release Bogdanovic, you let that go. Now all of a sudden you're paying about $155 in guaranteed money. Whereas if you hold on to Bogdanovic, you're up to like 174. You're actually above the luxury tax, and you're only about $5 million away from the first apron. And that's only with 9 players. So you're driven up above the first apron once you include like roster
McBride
holds.
Sims.
Well, no, that includes.
You include McBride? No, but roster holds, because roster holds are, correct me if I'm wrong, the way roster holds work is it's a hold of like $1 million, or maybe now it's a 1.1. But once you sign a player to that spot, then the actual player replaces it. So for instance, if they sign Alec Burks to the veteran minimum, Alec Burks isn't making $1.1 million this year. He's going to make, I don't know what a vet minimum for like a 12-year player is, but it's more than 1.1. It's like 2 point something or whatever. So then you get over the first apron. And I would, man, that's an interesting question. If the Knicks had like, if you don't, if you pick it up, it signals you got to know something, which is why I think you make a very astute point of like, maybe you try to see if you can push it back. But does
one
it?
thing.
Here's what I mean by that. Nothing's going on July or on June 25th, and they don't think anything is going to be going on July. What?
Maybe something could happen at the draft. The draft.
No,
is June 26th.
I'm playing. Let's play out the scenario for a second. No, I think something's going to be going on. You probably think something's going on. Let's assume, for just argument's sake, nothing's going on June 25th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and they don't think that's going to change by July 5th. Do they dispense with that at the cost of going into the first apron, but lose essentially their only quote unquote fungible salary, such that to then swing a trade before the following deadline, then all of a sudden you're breaking into the core of your team and sending out someone you actually, not that they don't care about Bogdanovic, but like a player you care about a lot more than Bogdanovic. Like that to me is an interesting question.
I think you are probably right. I think you're probably correct that it's more likely than not that they hold on to Bogdanovic. That being said, the Knicks were in a different but somewhat similar situation last year with Derrick Rose. And with Derrick Rose, the difference is it wasn't a non-guarantee. It was a team option, and they couldn't renegotiate that date to make the contract guarantee. They might be able to renegotiate the Bogdanovic date because Bogdanovic might not get that much money on the open market. Bogdanovic also might not be amenable to renegotiating that, because he might say, well, if I'm going to be a free agent, I'm coming off of 2 surgeries. If I'm going to be a free agent, I don't want to push this back to July 7th. Then you guys decide that you're not going to pick up my salary for next year. And now all of a sudden I'm hitting free agency when a bunch of cap space and a bunch of exceptions have already been. Can I ask you about that? Sure.
If how much of that comes, I love how we're going down this like very minute road. We're going to get back to talking about the team that just ended their season. But how much of there is it come down to like a trust factor? Like if the Knicks go to Bogdanovic and we're like, we're pretty sure we got something cooking in which you're going to get paid next year. We can't tell you 100% right now. It's the NBA, things fall apart, but we're pretty sure we got something cooking. Like, will those conversations happen? I guess what I'm asking.
They could, but they're not going to happen until something is like actually cooking.
Okay.
And it's possible that Bogdanovic could say, I don't want to take that risk.
Okay.
I don't want to take the risk of it falls apart and then you guys release me and then there's nobody on the market and I have to sign a contract that's way smaller than I could have gotten had I not pushed this back. Or it pressures the Knicks into being like, well, now you got to pick it up because you don't know. Maybe they believe that. So I don't know exactly how it's going to go. I do believe the Knicks will make an attempt to, as you said, kind of renegotiate what that guarantee date is. I think that would make a lot of sense. And I could see it making sense to Bogdanovic, because if the Knicks say to Bogdanovic, hey, if you don't pick this up, because the way the Knicks would handle this if they wanted to renegotiate it is if they would say to Bogdanovic, if you don't pick this up, or if you're not willing to move this, we're just going to decline it.
Yeah. And
if you move it, there's a pretty decent chance we're going to keep it. So you can maximize your chances of making the most money in 24-25 if you're just willing to move it. And that's the way the Knicks would get Bogdanovic to move it. And maybe Bogdanovic hears that and is like, yeah, okay, fine. I'd rather move it. I could see them picking it up no matter what too, like you said. But the problem is it's just going to send them into the tax. And I don't know if that's what they want to go into the tax for. You know, like they might have to go into the tax anyway. They might just have to do it. So many teams are going to be in the tax. The other problem is that, like, yeah, you're right. You put Bogdanovic and Randle together and all of a sudden you have that money that you can trade for a big star. But you know, we'll see exactly how they go about it, because something could also present itself to which they might be saying, okay, well, we're pretty confident that there is a trade where it's going to be Randle and Mitchell Robinson for somebody awesome. And Bogdanovic actually wouldn't be part of the trade. Mm-hmm. And we got wind of that on draft day, and they might think it's best off to save $17 million and maintain some flexibility there. It might be just Randle straight up for somebody else. You know, it might be that because whoever they're trying to trade with doesn't want Bogdanovic and they deem that Bogdanovic piece not worth going into the tax. I agree with you. The most likely scenario is they hold on to his $19 million salary. That's part of the reason that they wanted him, because he played a similar role financially to what Evan Fournier did for their future flexibility, where Fournier had a very similarly priced team option for next season. And Bogdanovic has the non-guarantee, which, as I just outlined, is even more flexible than the team option. But you just don't know, because you don't know what's going to pop up around the draft. You don't know what's going to pop up in June. And there's just crazy stuff happens in this league.
We'll get to that in a bit. I guess the other part of it from Bogdanovic's perspective is like, is there, not that there's all that many teams that have the full non-taxpayer mid-level, but let's just say someone did. It's like, is there a team out there that has that, is going to want to commit, what's a minimum 2 years or 3 years for the for the mid-level? Two. And still, he's kind of old, or maybe even there's a cap space team that doesn't feel there's anything worth spending their money on, and gives him like the Joe Ingles, you know, like here's a, you know, so whatever. This is getting far afoul of what we should be talking about right now. All right, we're going to take a quick minute to say hi to our friends at Foreplay. What's up, Knicks fans? You know, the other day, I was talking to two girls, and they were telling me how into Foreplay they are, and how they wished they had more single guys to do it with. No, not that Foreplay. We're not talking about getting teed up on the pod. I'm talking Fourplay, Foreplay. It's an app where single friends team up and double date other single friends. It's more fun, lower pressure, and a safer way to meet new people, which is exactly why single girls love it. They do. In fact, they love it so much that they make up the majority of teams on the app, as in a 3-to-1 ratio in your favor. Look, we all know everything is better with a friend. Just ask Josh and Jalen, even if Brunson won't admit it. And with Foreplay, you don't have to sacrifice bromance for romance, because it's a chance to enjoy a night out with a buddy while meeting two new people in a more social environment without any expectations. The icing on the cake, it is totally free. All right, it's game time. So head over to the App Store now and download 4Play. That's FOURPLAY, and get ready for a little 2-on-2 pickup. So back to my original thing, which is before we got off the rails. See, you drove it right off. Like,
I didn't drive it off though. I actually took it to like a far more advanced state than it needed to be at. I took it to a place that like that's nobody fair. that nobody cares about in an unironic way. Like it's just no one really cared.
No, I look, this is what people should. If you're a fan of this team and you are like the good vibes have kind of worn off and you're like concerned with like, okay, how do we win the championship next year? Like, this is the stuff that matters.
It matters a lot. It's like a really small thing and it's a huge trigger in what they're going to do moving forward.
But if just for anybody listening who's like, well, who gives a shit about James Dolan? Excuse my French. Crap about James Dolan's money. It has nothing to do with James Dolan's money. It has to do with the team building restrictions that come with not only the luxury tax, but I'm more focused on the first apron because to me that's far more punitive. But again,
for sure. I mean, with the first apron, for those who don't know, you've never, if you're over the first apron, there was always one apron. Everyone talks about the second apron. The reason why everyone talks about the second apron is because there was previously just one apron. And there were always restrictions upon hitting that first apron. You couldn't acquire a player via sign and trade. You couldn't use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. You had to use the taxpayer mid-level exception. There were always restrictions that were placed upon you when you surpassed that first apron, which used to be the only apron. Now, those restrictions are even more punitive. And one of the things that would really affect the Knicks, for what it's worth, is that you are not allowed to acquire, if you're over the first apron, you're not allowed to acquire more money in a trade than you're giving out. And that is something that will affect their flexibility in any kind of trade, and especially a trade for a star, because the more money that you have going out and coming in a deal, the more complicated all that kind of stuff becomes. So it will be very interesting.
So to really spell this out, there was a world where in doing something to further their ability to acquire a star, they will at the same time be inhibiting their ability to acquire a star. It's like, you have to, look, the NBA, this is what the NBA wants, right? And there's already amazing parity in the league. We're going to have a new champion. And this is, they want even more. Let's talk a little bit more about the team and then we'll get back to the summer stuff, because I feel like we didn't do that justice. I've peppered you with annoying questions all season long about like kind of like the vibe of the team and the culture and all the stuff that Knicks fans, I think, kind of like me at least, get off on. You've talked about how you've never, I think, quite covered a team like this, and just in terms of like the culture, the locker room, whatever you want to say. Putting aside like the tangible stuff, like Jalen Brunson became like a top 5 MVP guy, how significant do you think this year was for this franchise? Well, let's go like that.
Very, very significant. I mean, it's hard to answer that question without mentioning the tangible stuff.
So there's a Venn diagram here, but like, to the extent that you could like separate it out, which maybe you can, it's probably unfair to ask you to do so.
Look, this felt like the season that set the culture.
Okay.
That's what this felt like. Last year, they won games. They were better than expected. They made it just as far in the playoffs last year as they did this year. And they were a 5 seed versus a 2 seed. They weren't, in terms of their overall resume, last year wasn't that different than this year. They won 47 games versus 50, which is not a massive difference. They made it to the second round both times and got eliminated by a lower seed in the second round both times. You look at the overall resume and it wasn't that different. This year's team was unquestionably better than last year's team. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. They just had the injuries. Last year's team was very healthy. This year's team was very not healthy. I will say the biggest difference between this year and last year was that sort of change in culture and attitude, though. I didn't think there were problems last year. However, that locker room did not have the same sort of intensity as the one at the end of the year did this year. I thought a lot of the trades they made helped them in terms of this same pagedness that they had. You know, like RJ Barrett, for example, was always looking for a way to fit in and just never quite did in a way that worked perfectly with Randle and worked perfectly with Brunson. It just never totally worked stylistically. Emmanuel quickly was in a role on the court.
Okay. I just want to be very clear because we were talking about the locker room and I didn't want that to be
conceived. I mean on the court, but when there's not a fit on the court, it trickles into other places. You know, it's like not to say like guys got along well with RJ on a personal level. He was a very, very liked teammate and by all accounts, a good teammate. But just when things don't work on the court, it trickles over to like not being perfectly in sync in other places. And Emmanuel quickly was in a reserve role and wanted to be a starter. And to my knowledge, he wasn't putting up a fuss about it, but he wasn't necessarily like all the way into it because he had ambitions of wanting to be a starter and wanting to be paid like a starter and all of those sorts of things.
He said that on the record.
Yep, totally. Yeah. Quentin Grimes was last year really good. This year was kind of in isolation in terms of just his place on this team. And having a group of guys who all bought into their roles to the degrees that they did over the second half of the year, like after the OG trade, just everybody in that locker room, there's a difference between knowing your role and understanding your role. Everybody in that locker room fully understood their role. Like if you asked Dante DiVincenzo, what do you think your role should be on this team? He would describe the actual role he had. If you ask Isaiah Hartenstein, what do you think your role should be on this team? He would describe the actual role he had. There wasn't anybody on the role who like, if you asked RJ Barrett, what do you think your role should be on last year's team? Well, he would probably tell you, I got to be the scorer. I got to be the guy putting the ball in the basket. And that wasn't what they needed from a third option. You know, the cohesion was not necessarily there. And I think the cohesion on this year's team was really there. And it started something. I wouldn't mess with that sort of thing for what it's worth. I would not mess with it. It's one thing to be the 2018-19 Nets and be this cute little upstart team that punches above its weight and wins on culture, but like is a first round playoff out pretty easily and like overplays its talent level and expectations and all of that. And everybody feels good about it. But then you have the opportunity to bring in Durant and Kyrie. And you're like, well, what we're sacrificing here is culture for sure. However, the culture only gets you to being an automatic first round out. Whereas this team, you can convince yourself is much better than that Nets team. So you're giving something up there. Like you can win on culture if you have the talent to back up the culture. And I don't think they should be like the favorites to win the title or something if they stay healthy. But I wouldn't mess with that too much. Fred, I really wouldn't.
I'm at the point where, and I've made this specific comp before, and I'll run it past you. Like Donovan, it sounds like Donovan Mitchell's going to take the money, which I find interesting. Let's assume he wants to get traded. Let's assume he's available and the Knicks could trade for him. Whatever. Like Donovan Mitchell is a top 10 scorer in the league. I don't even know if it's arguable. I think he is. I mean, he looked pretty good in the playoffs when he was healthy. Like that dude is unbelievable. Dante DiVincenzo is never going to, he can never do the things on a basketball court that Donovan Mitchell could. It's not that close. And yet, I just watched this guy go out in a 7-game series and average 23 points a game over those 7 games, like efficiently too, and do like everything, almost everything his team needed him to, I mean, within reason. And he fits so perfectly, whether Randle was on the court, whether Randle got injured, if they needed him to do a little bit more of whatever when like Brunson wasn't on the court, like, and you know what? And I kind of want to ask you this, like next year, okay, Randle's back. Let's say they even bring in someone else and Dante gets a few less minutes, a few less shots. Like, I think he's going to be cool with that. Maybe to some, there's a degree to which that would have limits, but like, man, I'm in complete and total agreement with you. And again, it's like every situation, you can't make generalities because at some point there's going to be a certain player that comes along and it's like, oh, well, we have to go get that guy, given the cost or whatever. But these are tricky decisions and conversations to have is what I'll say.
Totally. And for what it's worth, like there are awesome players who fit that, there are a lot of awesome players who I think you can go and would fit that. I just think you just have to be careful. Like they have earned a lot of praise for the personalities they've gone out and gotten, for recognizing, okay, the Cam Reddish trades and the Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier signings. That's not the way to go about this. If we're going to employ Tom Thibodeau, then let's give him some damn Tibbs players and let's let these guys just go as nuts as Tibbs does every single game. And they did that. And clearly it's worked. Clearly this is a team that has bought into this Tibbsian culture. It's bought into this Tibbsian work ethic. And there are stars who have become stars operating that exact way.
Sure. Yeah.
Jalen Brunson is one of them. Jimmy Butler is one of them. Yeah. They've done it the exact way with that exact coach. It's very obvious. But I just wouldn't get away from it. And maybe it won't work. I'm not saying don't take a risk because there's a chance it might not work. Then if you refuse to take risks, then you will fail to innovate. That's not my point at all. But if there's somebody who you're really skeptical about, just how you were skeptical about, I don't know, bringing in, let's say, I'm not going to throw this player under the bus, but I heard there's a player who we can all agree was a good player who maybe the Knicks could have expressed interest in leading into the trade deadline. And
someone who was talked about a significant amount amongst the fan base.
I don't need to throw anybody under the bus.
Okay.
But I do think the Knicks were kind of like, personality wise, we don't think like it could work, but it might not. And it's not worth it. So the Knicks didn't really do anything. And I always understood that. I thought it made perfect sense to go that way. And I think they should have the same process when they're training for a huge name too, because that's somebody who's even more influential. And if you got somebody who just like from a culture perspective is going to align himself with Brunson and with Tibbs and is going to be the first one in the practice facility and is going to be like, yep, I understand my role here and I understand what to do. I think there are a number of guys who fit that description. Like I think Mikal Bridges fits that description. I think Paul George fits that description. Well, I think there are a number of guys who fit that description. The question is, will they be available? Will the Knicks be able to get them? And do the Knicks agree that they fit that description? And do they agree it's worth it?
Yeah. It's interesting because like the whole everybody, it's funny how Knicks fans, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I think it's positive, are like already proactively sick of the conversation or the rumors / conversation is going to be coming about should the Knicks trade for this star or that star, because it implies that it breaks up this core. And I think even more specifically will probably mean Randle will be out of town, just because if you look around the rest of the roster, if it's not a center and like doesn't seem like Joel Embiid is going anywhere this summer, Nikola Jokic, despite the fact that he lost, seems happy. I'm not sure that there's another center out there that would qualify as that level of star. So it's like, all right, well, OG's not going anywhere. They hope he's not going anywhere. So then it comes back to Randle, and it's kind of become this it's like almost like a third rail conversation where you don't Like, I think it's okay to suggest that there is a potential could theoretically be an upgrade out there, which would involve sending Julius Randle out. But at the same time, I also agree that the list of names that would realistically even potentially become available, it's like you can count the names on one hand. And like you just said, those guys may not be available this summer. And I guess what can you say about how you think they will approach it other than like, if they hear someone is interested in coming here, they'll have their meetings and they'll go from there. I mean, is that basically it?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be a big man for what it's worth. Like, I think it's just what Anunoby does is he gives them the flexibility to where clearly they can be successful starting with him at the 4.
Yes.
So I mean, look, if there's an awesome wing that they think is better than Randle and changes things, they could go with 2 awesome wings in Anunoby and whoever that other guy is. And I think they'll feel comfortable doing that. And if the other team insists on having Julius Randle, then you might have to do it. Even if your priority is to use Bogdanovic and draft picks or something like that. You might feel like, okay, you have to. We'd rather trade Bogdanovic and 4 firsts. Instead, we're going to trade Randle and 2 firsts, like maybe that's because that the other team wants, like different teams want different packages depending on who they're giving out and kind of what their motives are. Some teams just want to stay competitive. So I could see it happening, but I do agree that there's not like a push to trade Julius Randle.
Yeah.
I don't think there are people with the Knicks who are being like, we should trade Julius Randle. I think.
And why would they? They were 12-2 with him in the freaking, and they were world.
Yeah. You know what annoys me?
Please tell me what annoys you, Fred.
You know what grinds my
gears? Your gears? I want to hear what grinds Matthew's gears.
You know what does not tickle my fancy?
No, that was too far.
I can't take all these people being like, well, are they better Julius Randle?
Well, come on.
Where is this? Where is this coming from? What data? What eye test? What are you getting this from? The data says they're better with Julius Randle. The fact that they were 30-17 or whatever when Randle got hurt, 29-17 when Randle got hurt, says they're better with Julius Randle. That they were 12-2 during the first 14 games after the OG Anunoby trade when they had Julius Randle, that they were awesome in those games and they were eviscerating teams. They eviscerated Philly and they beat Minnesota in a 6-point game that was actually not as close as the score, and they annihilated the Nuggets at home. They were killing teams. Randle was playing beautiful basketball during that time. He was totally bought in.
Yes.
I said on this podcast that Julius Randle was acting in January like he found God basketball wise. Like I had never seen him so bought in and so happy on the court. He was, the way he was talking about the team, talking about Anunoby is the perfect fit. The way he was playing, making the extra pass, finding shooters. He was playing team ball. His defense was better. Like he was playing team ball. He was so bought in. And I talked to people behind the scenes about it, and they're like, oh yeah, like that is 100% true. Like he is so bought in right now. Like this is just a different level of Julius than there's been. And then he gets hurt. And I just don't see where any of that comes from. Like Jalen Brunson, from people not knowing things.
Well, finish what you were going to say. I have an answer for you, but yeah, what about you?
Well, I was going to say, as many great games as Jalen Brunson had in the playoffs, his overall playoff run was choppy. And it was choppy because of injuries in part, but it was also just choppy. Like his first 2 games against the Sixers were really bad.
Awful. Yeah.
He wasn't just missing shots. His process was awful. He was really bad.
Yeah.
And they won
the
those
last
games.
5 against the Pacers. If you take away first half game 5 and then the miracle second half of game 2. Now, granted, those were 2 of the greatest halves of basketball that Nick has ever played in the playoffs. So I don't want to be like, oh, just remove those. Like they counted and they were the reason they won those 2 games and they were in the series the way they were. But like the numbers from the, I mean, well, we got to have another conversation about whether it's because the injury was because he was worn down or just bad. But like for the last 5 games, it was not great.
Cool. You know what? If he's worn down, you know who would prevent him from being so worn down?
Even more of the, yeah.
Maybe another really good all-star, all-NBA level shot creator. Maybe that guy could help him against being a little bit more worn down. I'm not arguing Julius Randle is the perfect player. I just think this notion that they're better without Randle is just unfounded. Like, I don't know what it's based on. You know,
I'm going to tell you.
Brunson's efficiency in the playoffs was well below league average for what it's worth. And in the regular season, it wasn't that. No. He fell off. And that's fine. I'm not criticizing his playoff run. It does not deserve criticism. What I'm saying is things will be a lot easier for Jalen Brunson if you have another all-star level guy next to him who's also bought into the way they played like Julius was in January.
Katz and Shoot podcast guest DJ Zulo has been making this point for months about how all those great, wonderful catch and shoot opportunities that Jalen Brunson got playing off of Julius Randle, those went up in smoke. They were gone. They disappeared. No, the answer to your question is twofold. One, I think people saw, as again, a writer for The Athletic who writes about the Knicks, I know, wrote about eloquently multiple times over the course of this year, the leaning into the movement and the player movement, the ball movement, and like the more pretty offense. People saw that, loved it. It's like, oh, well, that wouldn't happen if Julius Randle's there, because what happens when Julius Randle's there? It's pound, 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 stop. And I think the reality is, one, that's not true. Go back and watch them in January. Like I did not find there to be any real push and pull between like, oh, well, Randle wants to play like this, but the Knicks want to play like that. Randle could play that way. Like, he's a smart player. He's an unselfish player. Like that. I'm not concerned about that. And then I think the other part of it is like the notion of one player holding on to the ball, but like, Brunson did that a lot. Like, that was the Knicks. Like, there were a lot of possessions where Brunson was just like, give me the ball and I'm going to go to work. Like, sometimes that's a good thing. And I get people are like, yeah, well, Brunson doesn't spin into 3 people and turn the ball over. I get there. It hasn't always been perfect for Julius Randle, but I think if you give him a full season, like, you're going to see, like, he did that stuff because he felt he had to force it. Like, he was just like, it was his show for so long. And I'm personally not worried about that at all, but that's just me. Yeah, I agree. Jalen Brunson had to dribble a lot and create a lot and shoot a ton. He had like a 37% usage in the playoffs. That's really high. That's really high. And for what it's worth, it wasn't just because everyone got hurt. At the beginning of the playoff run, the only guy they had out was Randle. Brunson was still taking 25, 26, 27, 28, 30 shots a game. That's still what was happening even before the injuries went down. That was still what was happening. Yep. And they could just use that other shot creator. Now, if you want to make an argument that Randle is not the perfect shot creator for that role, great. Of course. Fine. But very few players are, very few people are. And that doesn't make Julius Randle not good at it. And it doesn't make them not better for having him. So I think they're very much on that page of better for having him. And I don't think if they trade him, it would be for anything other than what they feel is a real upgrade on him. Let's start to, we'll finish up with and now he's back with CAA, so who the hell knows? Actually, no, we're not going to go down that road yet. Did you read anything into his switching back in terms of their potential negotiations this summer on an extension for him? I don't know what to read into on that, to be honest. Okay. It was a weird situation. He left and came back. Yeah, so he went to WME last summer, and then he went back to CAA like 8 months later. It's pretty rare. And he'd been with CAA for so long. And I know he was close with his agent at CAA. They had a really tight relationship. And I'm sure there was something personal
to that, where it was just like he had grown up with Aaron Mintz as his agent, and moving away from that was a big change professionally. I don't know what to read into it, to be honest. It's certainly not unprecedented, but it's not the usual.
All right, one more on this, and then we'll move on. But so the max Randle can extend for, which would be again it would involve him declining his 26 player option and then tacking on 4 years to next season, is 4 for 180, whatever it is, 181 or something. That's a lot of money for Julius Randle. What were we doing when Fred VanVleet signed? Before we knew it was only 2 guaranteed years, you were like, "That's a lot. That's a lot of Fred VanVleet." 4 for 181 is a lot for Julius Randle, even with the rising economy with the NBA. But that, I guess, makes it a little bit easier. How much, if you had to guess, how much do you think the negotiations, which surely they haven't started at all, the negotiations on Randle's next number would impact potential other conversations that they are having with other teams?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you extend Randle, you're not going to be able to trade him for 6 months.
Yeah.
So I would expect if they make a star trade that doesn't include Randle, then I think that an extension will be more on the table.
At a number that they will probably find to be palatable.
Yes.
Okay.
If they don't make a star trade, I think I could see an extension happening more than 6 months before next year's trade deadline. The next year's trade deadline is like February 8th, right? 6 months before that is August 8th. So
he's not eligible until, when is he? I saw this. Oh shit! I don't want to derail us when we're almost.
He's not eligible till September. You're right.
Yeah, he's not eligible. Look at me knowing stuff.
You're right. You called me out. Now we need Andrew to. You know what? Don't edit it out, Andrew. Make me look like an idiot. Kill me.
Forget about you. Look like an idiot. I need to look smart. I'm smart.
There you go. Good job. Good job.
Thanks. So
you're correct. You're correct. So yeah, I mean, the question will be, do they feel like that star trade has already come, or if it's coming? And do they think Randle will be part of it? Because if they feel like Randle's going to be part of it, I think they're going to be hesitant to actually lock him up for trade purposes. But if they've already made it, or they feel like it's just not worth doing, then maybe they just want to lock him up now.
Yeah, I mean, I was even more thinking along the lines of like, but again, I was like, okay, well, if it's a lower number, it keeps him as a more potentially palatable trade candidate. But then you factor in, well, depending on when he signs the extension, if he extends and they can't trade him this year, then all of a sudden now we're talking about the summer of 2025, and who knows how feasible a big trade will be by then. Which is why, again, to throw it back to you, in your article, you made very clear. And this is another thing I think fans need to realize. There is a timeline here. And like, for as much as it's like the Knicks have all the time, like their runway is just getting started. And like, to some extent that is true. Like, there is a ticking clock above this franchise for that level of move. Not to say that one would be impossible after this year, but yeah.
Yeah. Look, Zach Lowe was just talking about this in relation to the Nuggets on his last podcast, where everyone was throwing around the idea of, could the Nuggets reel off a dynasty? Could they do it? And all of a sudden now they're a second round out, who you have to start wondering about their financial flexibility a year from now, because the second apron is so unbelievably difficult to overcome. And Aaron Gordon is going to be expensive, and KCP, Michael Porter Jr. is already expensive, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is going to, that's a really good 3-and-D player who's so important to their core. And all of a sudden, the reason they've dominated guys is because of their starting five. And now their starting five is becoming untenable. They just can't do it. And they're already loading up on these cheap bench pieces and hoping that Peyton Watson is able to come in and make a big play for them. And it turned out he couldn't do it, and they couldn't get out of the second round this year. And how's that going to look 2 years from now when they've got even more young players they have to rely on? And will those guys will Peyton Watson be able to step in and fill KCP's shoes and make up for a loss that they potentially have to suck up like that? second apron is coming for everybody who wants to be really good. And you've got that window that is tough. And one thing that I wonder also is like Steve Popper had that report earlier this week about Jalen Brunson potentially being, how do you phrase it? That he would consider taking the extension this summer instead of waiting till 2025 free agency and signing a max deal. The extension this summer is like so much less money.
Yeah.
And the reason you would do that is to help the Knicks with long-term cap flexibility. You'd have to imagine that if Brunson does that, it sets a tone of like, okay, well, maybe Randle takes less than his max extension to come back. Maybe Hartenstein takes less to come back. Maybe Anunoby takes less to come back. You'd have to imagine that it sets some kind of tone. Now, I'm not saying that everyone will absolutely positively follow in that tone. And we are talking about large sums of money here. And something that I have thought about for a while is as these NBA salaries become more and more insane to look at, as these numbers hit numbers that Wall Street CEOs don't even reach. And we had LeBron James on Wall Street CEO salaries, but not like Julius Randle on Wall Street CEO salaries, not one-time All-Star Jalen Brunson on Wall Street CEO salaries. That wasn't necessarily the thing. And as these numbers become so unbelievably comically large, it starts to be considered taking less in the NBA world because the NBA's economy has become so unbelievably ginormous. The reality is like $36 million is still $36 million in the real world.
Yeah.
And if you say to somebody, well, you can lock in a situation that you like, where you're going to be happy. You can lock in the security of getting this. If Brunson gets hurt next year, like he hasn't done it for long enough to be absolutely guaranteed a max in 2025.
It's not apples to apples, but I wrote today in my newsletter, I was like, Isaiah Thomas wasn't that long ago. I understand Isaiah Thomas was like 5'8" and 150 pounds soaking wet, and Brunson's a little bit sturdier, and that makes a difference. But like, small guard's a small guard, man. That Brinks truck never came. I have to think that's at least some part of this calculation. If I had to guess, obviously I don't know anything, but
yeah. And the other part of it is like, yeah, Brunson can get $43 million in a starting salary next summer, or he can get like mid-30s if he signs something this summer. And is that extra $10 million going to change his life? Is that going to change his life? $10 million would change our lives. Would $10 million a year change the life of somebody making 36 versus 46 when taking the 36 will guarantee your long-term happiness, a situation that you're thrilled to be in? It will guarantee that the checks are going to be coming in for the next 4 years when that contract starts. And it will help the team that you want to win with. It will give them a better chance of being able to make moves that help them win. And I've been wondering for a while, like I've been wondering if some dude who just made $50 million for his whole career is just going to take the mid-level and go win somewhere. Like that some guy who's awesome is just going to be like, okay, I've made $250 million in my career now. I'm just going to take the mid-level, go win somewhere. I've been wondering if that's going to happen.
There's also
I don't think it'll happen yet.
I don't think it's going to happen yet either. The other part of it that I think is at least worth mentioning, and we had talked about offline I think it was a few months ago now, extending on a 4-year deal now and making the last year a player option makes him a 10+ year free agent. If he opts out of that, what would be a player option on the final year. So there's a world where he's making up this difference by, he'll be theoretically maybe just young enough by that point where, my God, the numbers by then. I thought of such a dad joke when you were talking just now. I remember it was like a People magazine or something, like so many years ago, it was like 60 is the new 40. That's how people need to think about NBA contracts now. Like 60 is the new 40. It's just,
yep. It's very true. Also, what it does is it pushes up his extension eligibility another year too.
Yeah.
So he can now sign an extension off of this next contract.
That's a great call.
he can sign an extension off of that a year earlier as well.
It's a great
when
call.
He's a year younger and healthier.
See, you made up for forgetting about the stupid the date.
There's a lot of stuff to remember, John.
How many pages is the document? The CBA. It's like
I've also been on full I don't give a crap mode for 72 hours. This is my ease back into somewhat giving a crap. The season ended and I was like, I need a few days, and I got a story for Friday. This is my ease back into everything, John. So
I'm excited to read whatever you have for Friday. Finally, the last thing we don't have to spend long on this because we're certainly not going to go through like potential names. The notion that they could this summer, like there's no upgrade over Randle, like get Hardenstein back, OG's back. It feels like to me at least, and just what I want to ask you, does it feel the same way to you that the likeliest scenario? Well, actually, no. I'm curious because I think you think that they're going to make a star trade. So I'll just ask you this: what do you think is likely? They make a big star trade and whatever that entails, or it's just Bogdanovic's salary and maybe a one or two of their picks this year, maybe one or two of the protected picks for insert, someone who will come off the bench for them making $20-25 million next season.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I probably should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about Bogdanovic. They could just pick it up and be like, we're going to use this to bring in an awesome role player, and we're going to attach 2 draft picks, and we're going to use it to just bring in someone who we think is even better fitting of this roster than Bogdanovic to improve the starting lineup maybe, or maybe be an awesome 6th man. Like something I think they will be after this summer is I think they're going to want somebody who can run their bench unit, but isn't necessarily a point guard. Like, I think that's something that they might want because it is tough to find, but I think that might be somebody that they want just because, or maybe as a big point guard, just someone who you can play next to Miles McBride without having to think about it. Because that's what they were after when they traded for Alec Burks. It was somebody who they thought could run their bench unit. Him and Bogdanovic were guys who they thought could kind of run their bench unit, and they wouldn't have to think about playing them next to McBride. They wouldn't have to think, oh no, 2 6'1" point guards, this is going to be a problem. 6'2" point guards, this is going to be a problem against this specific team. They just figured, okay, Alec Burks is long and he's a shooting guard size and he can run the offense, and so they'll be good. And obviously that wasn't the case. And then it turned out it was spectacularly the case during the Pacers series. Alec Burks averaged 18 points a game in 24 minutes during the Pacers series.
For the most wild of all the wild things. Absolutely.
What? Like you mentioned earlier off the cuff that Burks could just, maybe they re-sign Burks for the minimum. And I don't know if Alec Burks should get the same salary or the minimum again. I don't know. I don't know if there is somebody who is looking at what he did with the Knicks and is being like, man, 31% in the regular season. What a disaster. Alec Burks is the minimum, and watched everything that happened. It wasn't just the shooting. It was the unwillingness to pass and the way he brought down the offense and everything of that sort. And defensively, what a disaster he was. And I don't know if somebody else is going to look at Burks and be like, this dude notoriously is really, really cold or really, really hot. Yeah. And he's still exactly what he was before. He was really cold and he just happened to lose his spot because he was so cold this year. And then when he got his spot back, the dude blew up in the most important way that he possibly could. And he shot 51, 43, 84. He averaged 6.5 free throws a game in 24 minutes against the Pacers. And
it was a game in the third quarter in game 7 because of him. If it wasn't for him, it's not a game.
Totally. He was great during the Pacers series. And so I could see somebody being like, yeah, we'll give you our taxpayer. You look at the overall performance and it's still Alec Burks. He gets really hot. Yeah. He gets really hot and he can score and he's a vet and he's well liked in the locker room and all that stuff. And it's like, I could see that happening too. So I don't really know. I kind of have to look into how this playoff run maybe affected Burks' market. I haven't spoken about it with anybody yet. What was your question?
I was just talking about the notion that they could just go out and trade.
Oh yeah. I could see a Bogdanovic trade like for something else like that too. That's as opposed to like Bogdanovic and Mitchell Robinson or Bogdanovic and Julius Randle for some ginormous player. Like I could just see Bogdanovic and 2 firsts for a really awesome role player that helps them on both sides of the court. Yeah. If nothing matriculates, and maybe that will be worth going over the first apron for. They might have no choice. They might be over the first apron anyway.
I mean, look, whether it's that or whether it's a bigger trade, we get in here. It sounds like the Knicks are feeling pretty confident that they're going to go into next season again, like you said, not as favorites to win the title, but as a team that is they are maybe like, I don't know, inner circle contender versus outer circle, but they could win it. I think they're going to feel like they could win the 2025 NBA championship, but it's like, hey, listen, not too many teams that can convince themselves of that. So that's a pretty good place to be.
Yeah, they should. And I think that's how they're approaching this summer. Like, look, I think if Donovan Mitchell were to become available, I think their approach to Donovan Mitchell would be totally different than it was 2 years ago when they were just like, bring talent in the door.
Yeah.
Coming off a 37-win season, bring talent in the door, figure it all out later. They figured a lot of it out. And they want to bring in somebody. I talked about meshing with the culture, but they want somebody who's going to mesh on a basketball perspective too. And sometimes I think you can get too picky with that kind of stuff, but that matters.
That's the challenge.
Matters.
Isn't that the toughest part of being a GM or a president or whatever you are?
100%. And sometimes you can make a trade and everyone can say the fit makes no freaking sense. The salaries make no freaking sense. And you figure out the way to make it work anyway. See the Minnesota Timberwolves trading for Rudy Gobert, where everyone was like, it was the most derided trade in NBA history.
NBA history. Yeah.
And now we're looking at it and we're like, this team could win the title. Like that trade could have just won not the Lakers a title, not the Celtics a title, the Minnesota Timberwolves a title. Talk about being worth it and then some, you know? So sometimes you make that trade and it just works out, which is why sometimes I feel like it could be a little over scrutinized looking for the perfect guy. And if you have a good coach, a good culture, a good organization, sometimes what you think is a really good player, but an imperfect fit, everybody can just get on the same page and find a way to make it work, which is what has happened in Gobert's second season in Minnesota. Just a really good player who is willing to make it work and play his role with a really good coach who's willing to figure it out. And what is clearly a good culture that has them defending their asses off and playing hard and using their size insanely well and being really physical and all that stuff that is very similar to what the Knicks have going for them. And I don't know. I think the personality part is really important, but like sometimes the culture will just encompass someone who you don't even expect if it's that strong. You know, sometimes the Spurs are like, you know what? Yeah, we'll bring back Steven Jackson.
Well, their culture at that time was as strong and sturdy as anyone in the league. But then again, the Knicks culture right now, I think you could probably argue the same. Fred, obviously it's not like the last time we'll talk on this podcast for the whole summer, but I will just say your insight and analysis and humor, your reporting obviously has been invaluable. I speak on behalf of every Knicks fan anywhere when I say I don't know where I would be without you. And yeah, that's really it. Thank you.
Don't know where you would be without me. Oh my goodness. That's intense, man.
I made it though. You're obviously you're like there's no Knicks Film School podcast at this point without Fred Katz. So
my goodness, you don't. I think you'd be sitting in that same seat, the father of the same children, the husband to the same wife,
who's expecting me upstairs for dinner, so I should go.
You'd be getting the same crazy ass stares from the same very rational producer.
Listen, pay no attention to Andrew Claudia. Andrew's dead to me after our Hall of Fame episode. So that's that.
Fred, who's the farter?
He's
I can't believe it took this long to ask.
I've been sitting here for 45 minutes. Like, did I miss the farter?
I can't believe that. Can we talk about this for a second before I go?
Yeah,
we could talk about it for a second.
We spent 18 minutes on Bojan Bogdanovic. Let's talk about the farter.
That's important. Look, the fart is important.
You want to talk about interesting Knicks stuff, Angie. You can't have it both ways. Either I'm going to derail the podcast or we're going to talk about interesting Knicks stuff.
Did Levitard have you on to talk about Bojan Bogdanovic's option?
I can't believe that blew up in the way that it did.
It was amazing.
No pun intended. I just can't believe it. First of all, I thought when I said it, I mean, it's a real story.
Yes,
but I thought when I said it that it was clear that I was in jest about the motivational aspects of it.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that it blew up as a motivational fart is extraordinary. Shows the power of passing gas that has on people, how much they wanted that to be real. I walked into the locker room the next day and all the players were like, what is wrong with you? Like everyone had seen it. One of the players ran up to me. One of the players I saw when I walked into the building and he wasn't in the locker room at the time of it. And he was the first person I saw when I walked into the building. And he just says, I got 20 texts about it. Who was the farter? I walk in and all the players are just like, what is wrong with you going on the internet and talking about farting the whole time? Like, I'm like, I don't know, man. It just picked up. I did not see the legs it was going to have. I all of a sudden get a text from.
No, it's not. No, it's
Didn't
not.
you clip it?
No. See, this shows how much you pay attention. So,
shout out to New York basketball.
That's right. This actually, where it's my fault, Fred, is my instincts were off here. I thought the more interesting story wasn't the fart. It was Isaiah Hartenstein pretending that his shoulder was about to get amputated, because that's the story you told right after you said there was an epic fart. That's what I clipped and was going to post on that Thursday. And when I woke up, you were on the Dan Le Batard show talking about an epic fart. It was like, oh, okay, that's what this story is now. Never mind. Oops.
It's so stupid.
And Le Batard obviously approaches it from a place of like, this is absurd. Mm-hmm. We are he's obviously like, the funniest way to approach this is we are going to pretend like this is really an investigative thing. We're going to pretend like we're taking it really seriously because it's so ridiculous. And that's how you accentuate how ridiculous it is. So I go in and I buy into it, and then it gets aggregated everywhere as the motivational fart.
So yes or no? Do you want to reveal who the farter is or no?
Okay. You want to know who the farter is?
Yes, please.
Only if you're comfortable saying it.
Okay. I'll reveal it. I'll tell you.
Okay, here we go.
The farter is
wow, that's who the farter is. Oh my gosh.
Great job, Fred. As always. So proud to have you on the podcast. I regret every kind of thing I said about you a few minutes ago. It always devolves. Andrew, thank you for hopping up here.
You're welcome.
You're the one that derailed the pod now. Congratulations.
I'd argue I saved it, but
maybe some would argue that. Fred Katz, you are the best. Everybody should go subscribe to Katz and Shoot on patreon.com. Where did Fred go? There he is. And you should also read Fred Katz in The Athletic, where he has a piece dropping on Friday that he already talked about. Fred, anything else before we go fart or unfart related?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Thank you for having me on. Subscribe to John's newsletter.
Very kind. All right. Everybody, thanks for listening to another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. We'll be sure to return very soon with more noxious odors for your pleasure. Take care. Peace out.